one of the things that is enjoyable, I guess, about being a writer is applying its rules to to life, and I merrily go around in the belief that if writing has rules, they are exactly the same as the rules of living. Nature was not attending her deathbed, was not in this room nor anywhere near, had not been seen or asked after for many years. In fact, we had no memory of nature at all, and this, we began to suspect, was why we had no knowledge of death. There had been nothing natural in our dealings with our mother. We had been taught to suppress nature. We had been taught to regard the natural processes of our own bodies as disgusting. How were we expected to conjure death? This was obviously a very, very difficult thing to write, and I guess my kind of use of myself in my work, which really has been a use of myself. It has not been autobiography, really. It's almost been indifference to me and just use of what experience has shown me. And what I use of my own experience is, I'm pretty harsh, I guess, about, it isn't the things that I felt very deeply or the things that were important to me, or it's usually the things that I think have some collectivity in them, some grain of universality that in these experiences other people can find themselves. And so this particular notion of death of the parent, even though obviously I know that it is a universal experience, the difference that lies in how an individual feels about their parent, this question of love, it is all the difference in the world, and it goes to the absolute root and origin of how a human soul experiences itself and experiences reality. So I think once I'd embarked on this part of the narrative, it led me to see that parent as the origin of language, but also the origin of something deeper than language, the thing that needs language and forms language, but almost is sort of behind language. I guess these are the deepest assumptions about what what life is, how it works, who you are. So I actually think, traumatic as this was to write, I think it was also rather liberating and freeing. And part of what is very harsh in this chapter is the continual alluding to freedom as an aspect of the death of the other, the freedom that then is given back to the self. Sometimes she would open her eyes, and the glimmer of consciousness became visible. We had heard that in recognizing death, people recognized a greater mystery, the mystery of life. We had heard that these could be moments of revelation. But in her eyes, there was no suggestion of revelation. What we saw in her eyes were the vestiges of her control of the story of her life. The difficulty lay in the extinguishing of the storyteller. How could she tell the story of her own death? We thought that love might help her out of this difficulty. We thought love might show her how to die. Sitting by her bedside, we tried to offer love, as we might have tried to communicate in a foreign language, clumsily but out of necessity. Ridiculous as we felt, we tried to be sincere. It struck us how naturally we spoke in our own language of love. In our love for our children, for instance, there was none of this clumsiness and constraint. I mean, I suppose I think that the people I admire most in the world are the people who understood very early on that they had been formed by something and that they didn't have to remain in that form, that they could choose. And I think as a writer, I've really, my whole development as a writer has been a dawning understanding of the exercise of power over language and the possibility of that and the execution of that. And in the end, you think, at a certain point, perhaps any artist who misuses their life, as artists very often do, is careless of their life, careless of themselves, and so careful in this business of their art, you can't help but think how careful you could have been, how authorial you could have been in terms of defining who you are. And I mean, the corollary in this section of the book, which is called The Spy, is the filmmaker who elects to be anonymous. He changes his name so that his mother will never know that he has made these films that become very famous, and he's a well-known figure, but she thinks he's a school teacher in provincial France. And I found that idea, was that an alternative? If I had if you reinvent yourself and just leave this parent, this origin, this former of you in blissful ignorance, thinking that, they've turned out a human who's completely different from, who you actually are. Is that actually the kindest way? I mean, I think my approach, and probably a lot of people's approach, has been to insist on the truth. One imagines that that's the straight path, is to tell the truth about yourself, to argue, to fight for, to be recognised. And this idea that you could just slip on a mask and be free was very appealing to me. Why did we love our children? How, when we had not inherited the language of love, had we learned to speak it? Perhaps, after all, we spoke it badly and ridiculously. It seemed all at once terrible to be us. Terrible to be without origins in love, without language. Slowly we stopped trying to offer love to our mother. We stopped our awkward caresses and our unnatural words. We fell silent as the mechanical sound of her breathing came and went. So I grew up, in fact, in America, in California, and we moved, my parents were English, and we moved back, as they always put it, to England. I'd never lived in England, and I was sent to school. I had already been to school in America, and it was exactly at this interface of language that one was betrayed, that I had an American accent. I was sent to a school in a village in England, and it's interesting because more than anything else, the cruelty, the possibility, the opportunity to be cruel, which, I don't believe children are cruel, but I guess people are, especially in groups, and maybe it's a territorial set of behaviours, but it was exactly in this business of having an accent, of using different words, American words, that we, because I had siblings in the same position, were very vulnerable and attacked, and we changed our accents as fast as we could. And so this loss of, I imagine this is far more extreme for people where it's an actual different language. And in some ways, I often think American is a different language to sort of British English. I'm very, very conscious of that. But I suppose it's the ending. You end a particular self in that situation. And, I think education for anybody represents the ending of numerous selves, and maybe for other people it also presents the opportunity to be your true self for the first time. So it can do either thing. And kind of one of my theories is that why is it that all children paint and write and make music, and hardly any adults do that? So the finger of suspicion kind of has to point to that process of being educated, and education taking you away from, I guess, a primitive creativity that everybody possesses. And for some reason, some people, it doesn't work, and they become artists, so they stay children in a sense. So I think, who was it? It was Paul Arrigo who said, there is no creation of a work of art without shame. The creation of a work of art always entails shame. And this is something that I write about in Parade, that the shame that is instilled in us about the products of our own body, for instance, that what is an artist doing other than showing everybody the products of their own body? And I guess that does involve an embrace of shame. I've often thought that reading this is a difference I can find between male and female writers, essentially. And I mean, some male writers operate through a process of shame, but I think many female writers do, and that almost you could say that they can identify truth by the fact that shame is on top of it. So it's almost a question of searching for areas of shame and then asking what's underneath them and why they're there. I mean, for me, there's something in the writing process that is shameless, and there's a separate mechanism that absolutely is not present in the writing process, that is judgmental, critical, self-congratulatory, ashamed, certainly. But it's very interesting to me that it's almost like two separate people, that there's a shameless individual that never changes much, that's inside me, that never thinks about how this will look to others, never cares about what anybody else will think, and then afterwards I'm sort of oh dear, but I still wouldn't change those things, I don't think. So I guess it's not shamelessness exactly, it's allowing something to have its voice free of shame for a while, and then expecting my sort of self to take the consequences. I don't think I'm the only writer who began the business of writing thinking that they needed a good big vocabulary. And so, I read a lot of dictionaries, and I think I did that because I felt I needed armour, and that I don't think it was even intellectualism or a sort of serving of sort of literary values that might also have been male values, wanting to use big words, I think it was definitely a more of a sort of uniform, a way of putting on a uniform and defining myself against my upbringing, and at a certain point I came to a very, very interesting realization, which was that language betrays things without you necessarily being aware of it, and in fact, this is another aspect of all of these issues that we've been talking about, which is how do you gain control over your own persona? Why does nobody, why is it so hard for us to work out how to do that? To be ourselves and yet see ourselves as others might see us at the same time. And as I say, these are problems of living. They are also massive problems of writing. And but that awareness that I was being betrayed by language, that I was inadvertently saying a lot of things about who I was a sort of turning point for me. And I remember I'd written something and reading it and realizing that it sounded, that I sounded like an educated middle-class person, possibly even a pretentious, pompous person. And I took out all of the words that were Latinate, that had a Latin root. And in English, there's always a Latinate word and then an Anglo-Saxon alternative. And so I just, in each case, put in the Anglo-Saxon alternative, and the whole text completely changed. So suddenly I wasn't this middle class, and that was a real turning point for me, of realizing that if not that language had changed, that one could be much less visible in one's use of language, and that in any case, in a changing language, was a wise strategy. Well, I mean, the question of awareness is such an interesting question, and when you read the literature of the past, even reading Virginia Woolf, say, you almost see something lying on it, like a kind of curse of social class, of nationality, of which these humans living in their time were unaware, more or less. And someone like Virginia Woolf, who did extraordinary things with language and understood, really was the first person to understand, I think, the patriarchal basis of language and how that patriarchy infected even the imaginings, the fiction of women. This was, in a room of one's own, absolutely extraordinary point to make. And whether she quite gets to the end of that thought in terms of many other sources of kind of infection of language, I don't think so quite. It takes, I don't believe in progress particularly, but I do believe in evolution, and one sees these things evolve. That evolution involves a lot of loss, and people tear their hair out about change and loss, and they mistake it for decline. But this growth of awareness is what's behind it all, I think. And if that's the case, we should all rejoice. And I think that is the gift of now, as I see it, is the opportunity for high levels of awareness, even if it comes at a cost. One of the things that is really at the kind of center of Parade is how the entitlement to inhabit the experience of the other was broken down and returned to its owner. This is a very, very long, and as you say, bloody process. But in a small way in my book, that's what I'm trying to demonstrate, that in order for a human, an artist, to express themselves, they have to have ownership of their material. And that means that other artists have to lay off their material, and until such time when they are sufficiently empowered to use it themselves. And I mean, that isn't absolutely basic. It's something that we have laws about in in life, and there have been no laws about it in narrative. And I guess I think where the novel really lost its way was in the service of something called imagination, which seemed to be basically an entitlement to invade experiences, lives not your own, and use them. So in the book, the kind of slow, I guess, forward-going line of the book is towards the emergence of the truly female creator who gets to the end of her sentence, who gets to the end of what she wants to say without being interrupted.